Hi there, Glocal citizens. Welcome back to the podcast that inspires a borderless mindset around manifesting a new world. I am your host, Florence Adu, coming to you from a not so chilly Brooklyn morning. It's getting better, as I'm getting ready to fly away finally back to the continent to work on some other interesting and innovative projects. I'm excited about that. And it's a great lead-in to my guest because he is an innovator. So let me get straight to his bio. He is a serial social entrepreneur, innovation consultant, service designer, learning scientist, and startup coach, passionate about helping individuals and organizations be and do their best to enable a better world. He currently works on the financial freedom team at the Human Rights Foundation as Global Bitcoin Lead, driving strategy and execution of HRF's Bitcoin Development Fund. Now, this fund is a fund dedicated to growing adoption of Bitcoin and adjacent freedom technologies, especially in countries under repressive regimes. Previously, he was the CEO of Kala, QALA Africa, which was acquired by B-Trust and transformed into B-Trust Builders, which is an engineering training program helping African software developers transition to careers in Bitcoin and Lightning development. Prior to joining the Bitcoin ecosystem, he co-founded and remains non-executive director at Co-Creation Hub, CC Hub, Africa's leading social innovation center and tech hub. And earlier in his career, he gained experience at the UK's foremost social innovation center, the Young Foundation, where he established the Uprising Leadership Program. Femi Longe, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much. Really great to be here.
Excellent. So let's jump right in. Let's get started. So my first question is always, where are you from? Where are you local? And what is your craft?
So I'm from Nigeria. Mm-hmm. I currently live in Ireland.
Okay.
I've lived here for 7 years and a bit. Well, going to 8 years now. Uh-huh. My craft is simplifying complex, helping people learn, and marshalling resources to make the world better.
Okay. Very simply put, but there's a lot in that. So about a month ago, about a month ago, I was in Ireland and it was my first trip there. So tell us more about your local. Where in Ireland are you?
So I live in a small town called Navan, which is just about 25 minutes from Dublin.
Okay.
It's far enough from the city that it's rural and it's quiet and there are cows literally outside. But it's close enough to the airport so that if I need to travel relatively fast, which for me is a key priority.
Okay. All right. And now tell us more about your home. Nigeria is a big country. I have a lot of Nigerians on the podcast. So tell us more about where you're from in Nigeria.
In Nigeria, I'm from a town called Ilesha.
Oh, okay. I have a good friend. Yes, I've been to Ilesha. Yes. Okay. Uh-huh.
Yeah, so which is about 3 hours, 2.5 hours, 3 hours from Lagos.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
In the southwest. It's where the Jeshas, which is a sub-tribe of the Yorubas.
Ah, okay.
That's retired in Ilesha.
Are you farmers there?
We are farmers, actually. Uh-huh. My grandfather, my great-grandfather had massive farming land with sharecroppers still on it. Okay. My dad's there. After retiring as a banker, he's went back home to farm, raise pigs. Now he's too old to do all of that right now.
But he's living a nice life.
But he is living the relaxed life away from the city.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
We're industrious people in Ilesha. We're hardworking. We like education. Yeah.
Yeah. I found it so very quaint, very cozy. My friend there has a farm. So I was there to see the farm and experience it. So I like Ilesha. Okay. So you're from Nigeria and obviously you lived in the UK. Let's talk about why the where. So how did you come to be living, working, and playing where you currently are in Ireland?
So I'm Nigerian, mm-hmm. but by a lottery at birth. Mm. I ended up being born in the UK.
Okay.
Which thankfully gave me access to a British passport, which I got later in life. Mm-hmm. And worked in the UK, lived in the UK for a bit, then went back to Nigeria to start the Social Innovation Center, CC Hub. But at some point, I got married, had kids. My kids were growing. Nigeria was getting more complex, like Nigeria always does. Mm-hmm. And the UK itself was getting complex because sometime in 2015, the UK decided to leave the European Union.
Right.
Which for me is the biggest own goal that any country in the world has ever played against itself.
Yeah.
And at that stage, I was already contemplating moving to the UK, but it didn't make sense to move to an isolated country. So I decided I still want to live within the EU, but I want to live in an EU country where it will be easy to navigate language and language barriers. Turns out the only EU country that's native English speaking outside the UK is Ireland.
Right. Yeah.
So that's how I ended up here, long and short.
Okay. All right. And I would say you're kind of a nomad in terms of the ways that you work. So you don't necessarily have to be, and that's been a big part of your career. Right.
Correct.
Okay.
And I think for me, what's most important is mobility. The beauty, the advantage of having the access to the British passport, when I eventually got it, I mean, by the time I got it, I had seen 30 something countries with a Nigerian passport. It was a nightmare. All the visas, all the mistreatment and dignity that you have to endure in embassies. And then I got the British passport, and it gave me the power of spontaneous travel.
Yeah, it's true.
I can decide what requires me to be in Costa Rica, like you did a few weeks ago. Not worrying about where's the Costa Rican embassy, how do I get a visa?
Yeah.
All you're thinking about is there a flight? I think it's hard to underestimate the power of global travel and the exposure that comes from interacting with people in different parts of the world. And it's hard to underestimate. It's easy to underestimate the impact that has on the development of Africa. We are the only continent where we are treated like scum of the earth, and countries blatantly, openly discriminate against our people traveling. Whereas a young person from the US, from anywhere in Europe, at 18, at 19, will decide they want to go and explore the world. And all they do is get a backpack, travel. Yeah. And it's easy for them. They don't have to prove that they want to come back home. They don't have to present their grandmother's birth certificate, all the documentation that's required from us. So I'm a big fan of learning from travel. I'm big about seeing the world. Yeah. And Ireland is a good enough base to do that from.
Right. Makes a lot of sense. You said so much that I'm planning to follow up on. But before I get to kind of digging deeper into that most people are just serial entrepreneurs, but you are a serial social entrepreneur. And I can hear that in your ethic and thinking about, because it's true. We as Africans, I feel thankful and blessed that my father came and schooled in the US because I have an American passport. So that is definitely a blessing that we have. And I don't know how, now what's going on, it's a real interesting place to be. So we'll get into that. But just thinking about where your ethic came from, your father was a banker. He wasn't necessarily, someone social, but how did you find the idea of solving the world's problems from a social perspective as part of your craft?
So in university, I stumbled into what I still consider the biggest learning experience of my life. I found my tribe. So I stumbled into an organization called ISEC, IESEC, which is the biggest student-run leadership development organization in the world.
Oh, okay.
I ran into it when I was in my late teens in university in Nigeria. And it was the first time in my life where we were in conversations facilitated by other students like us, where we're having conversations about what is your value, what is your vision, what is your purpose, where do you want to be in 5 years? What problems in the world do you want to solve? That's where I got exposed to the idea of being a change agent. And literally, I was brainwashed. That's the easiest way to put it. It's a very fun community of young people who work very hard, but also play very hard. And at the heart of their conversation is, what are we going to do to make the world better? And it's also particular because of the history of the organization, because it was founded right after the World War II by young people from Europe who decided, the carnage that happened over the last few years, we should never see it again. And for them, a way to solve that would be to try and get as many young people as possible to first get to know each other across borders, but also to understand that they have a responsibility for making the world better and be part of a community and culture. So that one day when they're the leaders of their respective countries, whether political leaders or business leaders or social leaders, they have affinity to people in other parts of the world. So that whenever there's a decision that's going to trigger war, for them, it's personal to try and stop it. And that's it. In that organization is where the bug to make an impact on the world came. That's where I realized that my path in life wasn't just going to be about getting the job in the biggest multinational in the world, earning as much as I could. And I could have done that easily. ISEC is the non-profit in the biggest the non-profit in the world that has the biggest number of partnerships with the private sector. The private sector, large multinationals consider students from that organization as prime catch. And so it's almost tradition that leadership in the organization end up working in a PwC, a DHL, and IBM, one of the big multinationals. But I think very early I realized that I could have more impact doing work that's actually improving Africa. At one point, I was director for Africa in that organization, at the very top of the organization in the global leadership team. And I think at that point, my scope of concern and my scope of influence expanded beyond Nigeria and my tribe to the whole of Africa. I mean, I oversaw 17 chapters in 17 countries in Africa, spent 6 months on the road traveling across them.
Wow.
In my early to mid 20s. So at that stage in life, for me, it was interesting to see that the problems we have in our societies across the countries are similar. The challenges we face, the needs of the common man are similar. I realized I'm one of a minority that actually have that privilege of having seen a lot of Africa. And that's also in a place where we can actually forge solutions to improve the continent. And in that organization, I also met lifelong friends. So my business, the Co-Creation Hub, I founded it with a friend that we had actually worked on the same on the team. We met in ISEC during it, and we worked on the national team of the organization in Nigeria together. Okay. And the other partner, we met in ISEC in the university. Yeah. He worked in my local team together with me. So for me, that was the place that both exposed me to that thinking, but also put me in contact with people that I could do it together. It can be very lonely and a hard work trying to fix the problems in the world. But when that's what the rest of your tribe are doing, then it becomes
very easy. Yeah, becomes a way of life. Yeah, right. I love that. And so Co-Creation Hub, would you call it because you were responding to the times that you decided tech was kind of your vehicle for the most part? Because it seems that is a lot of what is part of your ethic is tech and innovation. I mean, innovation is usually associated with tech, but tell us more about why it came to be.
So Co-Creation Hub, for people who are not familiar, the easiest thing to box it as a tech hub. But you will never hear any of the founding members of Co-Creation Hub call it a tech hub. It's actually a social innovation center. And we're very specific in the choice of the words. We support innovation that improves society, innovation that increases quality of life of citizens. But at the same time, we do not believe that the only way to have impact is through a non-profit. We believe you can use the efficiencies of business, the ethos and the smart and thinking in business to actually solve social problems. And so we created the hub as a place where anyone who wanted to solve a social problem in Nigeria initially, that needed any of the resources they needed to get their ideas off the ground, could find those resources. But it happened that we set up the space at the dawn of the mobile apps. So the Apple launched the iPhone, I think, in 2007 or 2008, which launched the App Store and apps in phones. We started the CC Hub in 2010 when the idea of creating apps were new in Nigeria. And at that time, we quickly realized the power that comes with people, the average man on the street, having effectively a computer in their pocket. And we realized that the mobile phone could do more than just make a phone call and send a text message. And so it became clear that that was a massive distribution channel for the innovation that the people were supporting would be creating. And so for us, the technology side of the work was an important distribution channel and vehicle to scale innovation. We did not do it for the tech. Mm-hmm. We did it for the social change,
right,
and social innovation. Tech happened to be a critical tool to help the ideas that are coming out of space rapidly scale. Mm-hmm. And that's why we embraced it.
Right. And so in the rollout, did you find that every country, you mentioned that it was similar challenges throughout the country, but as the hub grew and spread to different countries, what were some of the nuances of the different markets that you were working in?
So they initially, for the first few years, we were only concentrated in Nigeria.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
But gradually we've expanded now to Rwanda, and then we acquired the iHub in Kenya. So we're now in Kenya. And then I think year before the last, we opened a space in Namibia. Every country is different. Every country's market is different. Every country's entrepreneurial drive is different. Every country's governance
capital, that's right. Mm-hmm.
and ability to attract capital is different. So the intention is not to try and force a one-size-fits-all solution in every single country in Africa. Mm-hmm. Some of the problems are the same at the social level. Some ideas can scale across continents, across countries. However, if you're scaling ideas, it's always best to localize the solution. So if a solution works in one way in Nigeria because of the way Nigerians think and approach technology, doesn't mean that solution in that exact form will work in Ghana. We need to be able to understand the psychology, the sociology, the physiology, the history, the culture of Ghanaians, the business acumen, the big business approach of Ghanaians in customizing that solution to match the reality of Ghana. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, we don't have enough solutions that scale across Africa as much as we should, because again, almost every country has its own unique constitution and business regulations, which can be tricky for startups to navigate.
Right.
The idea of the CC Hub Group is, with our presence in all those multiple markets and through our network of partners in those markets, that we craft or we create a landing pad that can help good ideas scale across the continent relatively easy. That can take advantage of policies in specific markets that work. And so to give you an example, Rwanda is a relatively small market, but the Rwandan government had an intention that they want to be the pilot arm for innovation in Africa. And so the CC Hub's design center there tries to leverage that for startups that want to navigate that market. Namibia has different policies. Kenya has different approach, different history. How do we use understanding of all of those in helping startups and good ideas that improve quality of life for Africans field across the continent?
Right. Makes sense. And so as you speak about these other markets, I want to ask about Glocal speak. So this is a word, a phrase, or a saying that is a meaningful part of your local experience, wherever you decide it's local for you, and how or why you come to value it as Glocal speak.
A word or a phrase that's part of my experience. So I'm a firm believer in the power of people to solve their own problems. And oftentimes you hear African solutions to African problems. But oftentimes it's usually used by politicians that want to use that to divert attention, particularly in the moment when they're being called out for their poor practices. Mm-hmm. While that is the case, I firmly believe in African solutions to African problems. I firmly believe that within every problem is the seed to the solution of the problem. And the people who are experiencing the problem the most can give you the best clues as to what the solution of that problem would be. Mm-hmm. And so for Africa and the many challenges we face in Africa, within every challenge we have are the seeds of the problem. What I think is the biggest challenge we have in Africa is it's a mindset challenge. For a long time, we've been undignified by the problems we face. Mm-hmm. And we've been made to see them as obstacles. Whereas if we could only change our specs, our glasses, we'd realize that the problems we have, which are unique, are actually our biggest advantage. be smart enough to figure out solutions to them. Because there are other parts of the world that are experiencing similar problems. There are other parts of the world that will experience similar problems if we go by the trajectory of the world right now. So that if we can get out of the victimhood and the victim mindset and realize that we actually have agency and the ability to tackle our problems head on and find solutions to them, it will not just help improve our quality of life, it will also improve our sense of self.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what mostly we have lost. We've lost it through the aid industry and being made to look like the beggars of the world. And I think that dignity is something that we really need to get back. And we only get it back by actually being the ones that are solving our own problems.
Mm-hmm. I agree. And, I have many friends who work with USAID and have worked in the development space. And so context, since, the US has basically abolished USAID and there seems to be a lot of, challenge. A good friend of mine who worked with them had always been telling me, and I've heard you say this as well, is that the amount of aid that actually gets to the programs is so small. And so, yes, it should be, there's a difference. So let's talk about it. Let's talk about your impressions of what's happened and the good, bad, and the ugly of it. And then what's next? How does that now dovetail with what you're championing now?
So what's often not said, and I think I'm starting to build the history as one that tries to say the things as people are thinking, but they don't say out loud, is that a lot of the aid industry is a stimulus for local businesses in developing countries. So I've tried at CC Hub in the past to bid for a project to do work in Nigeria that was funded by, I don't know if it was the State Department or the World Bank.
Mm-hmm.
And they awarded the contract to a small 2-man consultancy based in DC to do work in Nigeria. And for a contract that I bidded for, and then that 2-man consultancy came to me in Nigeria and wanted to subcontract the work to me.
Classic. Mm-hmm.
And I've experienced similar on a project funded by the Dutch Ministry of Foreign Affairs, focused on Nigeria. So while it's easy and convenient to position aid as the way the bulk of Africa is funded and things in Africa are funded, a vast majority of that aid never leaves the country of origin. Mm-hmm. It is recycled. It is funding salaries of people locally. It is funding cars for companies for manufactured by companies that are domiciled in the country of origin. It is funding hotel chains that have their headquarters in the country of the origin of the aid. Only a small percentage of it gets to the continent, but the amount of PR value that follows that small percentage that comes to the continent masks a lot of the shadiness in the sector. But it also makes Africans start to see themselves as beggars, not realizing that the amount of money that comes into our continent from our brothers and sisters in the diaspora dwarfs anything that comes into the continent.
Exactly.
Foreign aid. Mm-hmm. But again, they say until the lions start
telling the story.
Mm-hmm. No, until the lions have their own historians, tales of hunting will always glorify the hunter. And that is the case of Africa.
Yeah.
Until we start realizing what we have. I see the diaspora of Africa as an asset. People see the Nigerians, the wave of migration as something negative. Yes, it can be negative if we don't do the work to actually make it an asset. Mm-hmm. And what has happened with the Chinese, if you look at what has happened with the Indians, they've made mass migration a net positive. Mm-hmm. Similarly for here in Ireland too, with the waves of immigration that's happened to Australia, to the US, to Canada, all through the last few centuries. They've made it a net asset. How do we make the fact that our people out there are not just doing great work, they're earning great income, and they're sending a huge chunk of that income back into the continent, whether it is to support their families or to fund businesses or to pay people's salaries or to build houses or to export goods or to fund schools or to fund hospitals. You have tons and tons that's coming back to the continent through the diaspora, but the diaspora is not getting both the recognition. Mm-hmm. There's not enough strategic intention from most African governments to capitalize on that inflow of capital, leverage it as something that can actually help their countries thrive. The amount of influence that comes with international aid, the amount of soft power. So when I see what's happening in the US, yes, a lot of the aid industry, the Republicans may say that the aid industry is not adding value and they want to be America first. But they don't realize the amount of soft power that international aid actually buys their countries. For every dollar that they give in aid to one of our countries, do they know how much their companies that end up in those countries milk from those economies?
Exactly.
Use the fact that they're giving every single one of those aid schemes usually comes with tons of conditions. And those conditions are the things that favor their countries and gives them a lot of soft power. So on the one hand, I see all the noise and outcry about this whole stopping aid, but a part of me is pleased because I know the amount of soft power that's going to be lost.
Right.
But however, I know that nature abhors a vacuum. The question is what is going to fill
the space. Right.
And that is where the intentionality of our leaders matter. If they're intentional, they'll fill that space with the right thing. If they're not, they'll leave that space as a vacuum, and maybe negative actors will come and will fill the space and will work for it.
Exactly. My sentiments exactly. I just feel like this is such an opportunity for African leadership to take back, to be really leaders. So it really begs the question, how much of a leader are you in this particular situation? Because we have a lot of them, and it's only the US. So we should put it in perspective. It's only the US that is behaving this way. There are these other countries that are continuing to be where they are. But in this grand scheme of things, the US is a large aid funder. So I agree wholeheartedly. And so you have a solution. You have one solution that could be a massive game changer, and you've been working on it for a while. So let's talk about Bitcoin. Why Bitcoin? And also why Bitcoin as opposed to just the blockchain or the crypto sector? So tell us a little bit more about Bitcoin versus blockchain and why you've chosen that.
So I got into Bitcoin almost 3 years ago now, I think. Yeah, almost 3 years ago now. If you told me 5 years ago I'd be working in Bitcoin, I'd argue. But I got into Bitcoin by accident-ish. So some people were starting a program to train Bitcoin engineers from Africa, and they needed someone to run the program. And a friend of mine told them to speak to me. So they spoke to me, but they didn't tell me they wanted me to run it. They asked me to help them recommend someone to run it. But for me, I couldn't recommend someone to run something that I didn't understand. So, and up till that point, I mean, I'd seen Bitcoin very early, but I didn't understand Bitcoin in its entirety. I saw it as early as 2013, 2012, 2013 with when the Silk Road was taken down. I speculated in it in the mid-20s, in 2016, 2017, because what I saw was a digital asset. When they spoke to me, it was the first time I actually looked at Bitcoin as technology. Because up to that point, I didn't know anything about Bitcoin development. I didn't know anything about how technology was built. Anything about the people that were building Bitcoin. And so when they reached out, I went online, read a few blog posts, read a couple of books, and I saw the big picture of the technology, bigger than even what the people who spoke to me had seen. I realized very quickly from my exploration that part of things that was broken in the world that actually causes Africa to be where it is the monetary system. I'd known about it anecdotally, but I didn't see it from a system standpoint. And I realized, I guess the designer in me realized that the way we can't beat the system at its own game. I'm a big fan of the story of David and Goliath in the Bible. And if you've read David and Goliath, the book by Malcolm Gladwell, David beat Goliath in that battle not by fighting the battle according to the rules of war, but by fighting according to his own rules. So when David was going to face Goliath, King Saul gave David his armor and his sword, and David put them on and they weighed him down. And if he had gone to Goliath to go fight Goliath with swords, 9 out of 10 times he will lose, because Goliath had been fighting battles with swords long before David was even born. So David didn't go to Goliath to fight in his own war, in his own way. He went and played in with completely different rules. He went without armor, which meant he had more freedom to move. So that when that one threw the spear at him, he could dodge. If he had armor on, he wouldn't have been able to dodge the spear. He went with stones. He was fighting someone that needed close contact to fight, and he was fighting with range, with the sling, and he won. So I realized in the scheme of global economy, Africa cannot win if we're trying to play with the West at a game that has been defined and created by the West according to rules created by the West. And that is the current monetary system that we are in. And Bitcoin was created as an alternative monetary system. It's created as a way to send value from one part of the world to anyone, anywhere else in the world without going through a trusted intermediary. So there is no bank, there is no Visa, there is no MasterCard that is either tracking your transaction or potentially censoring your transactions. Why is that important for us as Africa? We have been intentionally walled out of the global financial system, and we only engage with that global financial system on terms that are not ours. Terms that were created by Visa, MasterCard, Swift banking system, PayPal. If you traveled from America to Nigeria and you did a PayPal transaction in Nigeria with your American PayPal account, once PayPal detects that your IP is in Nigeria, they will freeze your PayPal account. And if you call customer service till the cock crows, they will not respond. Until you leave Nigeria and go back to the US, can you get your account unblocked? And when a few years ago, they eventually allowed Nigerians be able to create a PayPal account, they only allowed us create send-only accounts, which means a PayPal account from Nigeria, I can use it to pay you, but you cannot pay me into PayPal. How do you wall out close to 200 million people from the economy? At one point, PayPal was the biggest way of paying on the internet. How do you systematically cut out, in the name of fraud prevention, cut out an entire country from global commerce? And even now, we still have those restrictions. Sometimes they put it under the framework of anti-money laundering. But in truth, those regulations are usually completely non-discriminatory, and they end up creating hurdles for even people trying to do legitimate transactions, get access to the global economy. In Nigeria, an American wants to make a payment to somebody in Australia. They don't have to think twice. You send them a payment link, you send the payment, you're not making mental calculations in your head. A Nigerian wants to pay a hospital in India for a surgery, or wants to pay school fees to university in the UK, or wants to migrate to Canada and needs to move their life savings with them from Nigeria to Canada. They start going through all kinds of mental mathematics and mental gymnastics. How do I convert my money to this and convert it to this and send it through this? With all that friction, how can we prosper? Prosperity, I believe, firmly comes from trading. And that only happens when you have as little friction as possible. The more friction you create, the harder it is to create. The more tariffs you create, like Trump is trying to do, the harder the amount of trade that happens, the lower the prosperity that you experience. When you have a whole continent that has been systematically locked out, and then somebody creates this technology that allows that player to play in the global economy without going through intermediaries, that's exciting for me. Why Bitcoin and why not cryptocurrencies and any other thing that's out there? First, for me, the genius of the creator of Bitcoin, Satoshi Nakamoto, was that this person created decentralized money, which was supposed to be a public good, handed it to a community, built it, ran it for a few years, handed it to a community of fellow builders, and walked away from the scene to make sure that he or she is not a thin god over the system. He or she is not a point of failure for the system. No government in the world can put a gun to he or she's head and say, give us the keys to the kingdom. You don't have that experience with any other cryptocurrency on the market. Not Ethereum, not Solana, not Ripple. There's usually either one person or a group of people that actually call the shots over those technologies. there's a CEO for the Ethereum Foundation. There's a CEO for Solana, for Ripple. There is no CEO for Bitcoin. So it's been created as a public good. It's also been engineered to have a limited supply. Only 21 million Bitcoin will ever be created through a clearly written out algorithm that can't be changed, or that the community will not allow to be changed, because the community that drives it is also heavily values driven. You don't have the same in any of the other currencies. In any of the other, most of the other cryptocurrencies, like we even saw with Trump and his meme coin recently. Usually the person that creates the coin and his friends and his family and his girlfriend actually end up owning the most of the cryptocurrency. Then they put it out so that unsuspecting people in the public will buy it, until one day they move with the bag and then you're left with nothing, which is typical for Ponzi's. And we've seen it too many times in the past. We've seen it with the likes of Sam Bankman. We've seen it with the guy on, what's the Korean guy on one of the, I've forgotten the name of the coin, USD something. We've seen too many instances like that where people are rug pulled over their life savings. And the only cryptocurrency that has been resilient to that over it consistently is Bitcoin. And at the heart of it is the ethos of the community that builds it, the cypherpunks, who are largely doing it for the public good. What we've seen since its success is lots of people that are doing it for the individual good. And it became convenient. I create something, I create Femi coin, I give it some arbitrary value. Mm-hmm. I find some unsuspecting members of the public that are willing to buy it. And then I ride off into the sunset with their money. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I can't back something that for me is as shallow as that.
Right.
So that's why I don't touch any other cryptocurrencies. That's why I don't touch Web3. And I think the blockchain, which is the foundational technology for Bitcoin, is a very interesting technology. However, I think like most technologies, we start creating it like a fad.
Yeah.
Everything, you have to add blockchain because that's what the investors want to hear. Do it on a blockchain. Not everything that's done on a blockchain necessarily needs to be on a blockchain. That's one.
True.
And the second half of it is a lot of blockchain projects almost automatically assume that once they're creating something on the blockchain, then they also need to create their own tokens and their own currency.
Right.
And for me, that is flawed. Lots of ideas that you want to build, that you can build on the only truly decentralized, resilient cryptocurrency that exists, which is Bitcoin. A lot of the ideas that people are building on blockchain, build it on Bitcoin. And if Bitcoin wasn't as flexible to use a few years ago, that is changing, and that has changed. Mm-hmm. Of course, the allure of we have our own coin and it's trading on Binance often outweighs the actual intention that people are trying to create. And for me, once human greed is a factor,
oh gosh,
at some point things will go wrong.
Yes.
And so I'm not interested. And I guess the other reason for me is because I hear people say, oh, what about this coin? What about this one and this one? For me, I have limited bandwidth. So to actually investigate every single coin, there are tens of thousands of currencies. And
so many.
I have no bandwidth to actually go and investigate every single one to see which one is legit and not legit. When I can see that the first one that was created has maintained the ethos that made it and it works. Mm-hmm. For me, it's also a way to simplify my life.
Right. I mean, it helps you to kind of achieve your mission, because if you're focused on this particular platform, you're adding the value that then can be communicated to those that you are attempting to bring on to the blockchain. Now in your current role, it's clear like that now it makes perfect sense, like that value of it being a public good with the foundation that is about human rights. That connection between human rights makes so much more sense.
It does when you also realize that beyond the global challenge with the monetary system, mm-hmm. in repressive environments, money is often used as a weapon against opponents.
Yes.
And against human rights activists. Mm-hmm. If the government doesn't like you for exposing corruption, the easiest way for them to get at you
to block
is to get a bank to freeze your bank account, or to seize your assets, or to go after you, in which case you may have to pack everything up and flee the country for your life.
Yeah.
And they do it because they know that the work you need to do requires resources to do it. And so if they can squeeze the resources, then they can squeeze your ability to do the work.
Yeah.
And if you get support from outside the country, they can also use that as a way to discredit you by saying, oh, he or she is a foreign agent. The underlying issue that you're talking about, and they say you are sponsored, it's another country that's using you to destabilize us.
Mm-hmm.
So in our work at the Human Rights Foundation, we realized that the human rights activists we're working with need alternatives. They need ways to do their work.
Mm-hmm.
They need ways to be financially resilient so that raising of bank accounts is not the reason to stop their work.
Mm-hmm.
Very quickly, we realized having censorship-resistant money, having money that dictators cannot control, a superpower and an important weapon in the toolkit of human rights activists.
Yeah.
And so we doubled down on both introducing them to Bitcoin, but also what we do with our fund is we also support the growth of Bitcoin. Make sure that the properties in Bitcoin that we like, the privacy preservation, the censorship resistance, the decentralization, the security consciousness in Bitcoin, that those properties can be enhanced. And so we fund people who are building and continuously improving Bitcoin to make it stronger, more private, more resilient.
Mm-hmm.
But we also support people that make it easier to use for people everywhere in the world, so that people don't have to understand the finer details of how Bitcoin works to be able to use technology that's riding on Bitcoin. So we invest in user experience. We invest in translation projects to translate Bitcoin apps into local languages so that engage with the technology in the language that's convenient and comfortable for them.
Sure.
What Bitcoin educators that are onboarding people and helping people understand Bitcoin. So that's what we invest in. We've been doing that now. It's going to be 5 years in June this year.
Wonderful. Mm-hmm.
And I joined the fund last year with the intention to see how we can both scale the fund. So to give context, this year we currently give $1 million in grants every quarter. And the intention is to also find interesting projects in the rest of the world, in the global majority countries. So in Latin America, in Africa, in Southeast, which also in many ways overlap with the country, the repressive environment where a lot of our activists exist.
Right.
See how we can find builders in those countries that we can also invest in to build solutions that our activists can use.
Yeah.
One part of our work is around making Bitcoin better, but the other half is getting Bitcoin in the hands of the activists that we support.
Sure. That's great. Oh, there's so much more I could ask. And I want to invite you back to have a broader conversation with some other players I think would be interesting. But before we go, I want to ask two things. What is your mindset hack? And which kind of relates to who is Femi when he's not being a social entrepreneur? Who are you when you're not working?
Mindset hack, early morning routines. Critical. I try to meditate. I try to write. I do a practice called morning pages, which I'm familiar called Julia Cameron.
Yep, the artist way.
Yes, the artist way. So at least 3 pages every morning. I try and meditate. I should exercise. I don't exercise as often as I wish I wanted to. But I think the mornings is critical.
Yeah.
And trying to stay present as much as possible.
Yeah.
I realize the bulk of the problems I have usually comes when my mind is either in the past or in the future. I'm a firm believer in the power of now.
Yeah, absolutely.
I read. I read a lot.
Okay.
I read everything. I'm an eclectic reader. I also watch. I have addictive tendencies.
So you binge.
Try and avoid series.
Okay.
Because I'd rather watch a movie. Maximum 3 hours, it's done. I've seen the end.
Yeah.
Because once you start a series, I have to see what comes next.
Right. The story just draws you in.
I don't have that much time. So
Yeah, same.
But I'm a movie person.
Okay. So what is one of your favorite movies, and what is one of your favorite things to read?
One of my favorite movies. So I'm a sucker for musicals.
Oh, okay.
I like musicals.
Okay.
I like historical fiction.
Uh-huh.
So I like movies that are built around real events from the past.
Okay.
It's hard to tell you what my favorite movie is.
Have you seen Wicked?
I've seen Wicked. I loved Wicked.
Okay. I haven't seen it yet, so I'm keep.
It is very good.
Okay. All right.
It's very good. I saw what's it called too, Emilia Perez.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Which is also musical.
Okay. I'm not familiar, but I'll look it up.
Also good. Zoe Saldana.
Oh, right. Yeah.
What I read, what can I recommend? The one book I recommend the most, more than any other book in the world, is Start With Why by Simon Sinek. I'm a firm believer in that, in the philosophy that the greatest leaders, greatest organizations communicate with their why first, rather than how or their what.
Right.
And usually I find that when I advise or support startups, usually when their things are misaligned, a conversation about why did you start doing this in the first place?
Yes.
It's usually a good way to actually figure out where did we go out of sync.
Right. Yeah. Nice. So Femi, this has been so wonderful. I really appreciate your time. Before we sign off, do you have any last thoughts you'd like to share with our listeners?
Because this conversation is about Glocal, and I know there's a lot that focuses on the Africans and Africans in diaspora. One thing that I'm seeing a lot, and I hope the trend changes, is it's very easy when you move abroad to find a job that can pay your mortgage, forget everything completely about where you're coming from, and contributing to where you're coming from. And in some cases, forgetting your dreams and your entrepreneurial aspirations, because those environments, they prioritize employment. But I think Africans in the diaspora need to understand that they are a secret weapon for the continent.
Absolutely. And
it's the only place that we eventually can really, truly call home, where you can't randomly walk in a park and someone says, go back to, right?
Yeah.
We're all invested in development of that continent, and anything you can do to actually make it move forward is critical.
Wonderful. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for that. That's going to do it for this episode of the podcast. Thanks for joining us. You can catch us Tuesdays with new episodes at glocalcitizenspod.com or wherever you get your podcasts. Please like, share, subscribe, leave us a review. You can leave up to a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, and a thumbs up on YouTube. Please let us know you like us. It helps others find great content on the internet. As well, check out the show notes. There's always great links to the information that we discussed. And until next time, bye for now.